Are we actually out of time? I mean, literally out of time? Let's dive right into this explainer today, where we're unpacking a pretty urgent academic report on the climate crisis. And we're not just looking at this through the cold, hard lens of science. Oh no, we're going to explore it through economics, ethics, and even theology. The source material we're looking at makes a really strong argument that our time is practically up, and to understand why, we've got to look at this crisis from every possible angle. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the zero point 0.5 degrees left for humanity. Then, Gaia and Earth's broken regulation. Third, the economic shift towards an ecological footprint. Fourth, the bare face of climate inequality. And finally, religious ecological responsibility. Let's get right into it. Section 1, 0.5 degrees left for humanity. We're kicking things off with the stark reality presented by the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, regarding our rapidly closing window for survival. So here is the absolutely crucial point. Global temperatures? They've already gone up by 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. That means we have a mere 0.5 degree margin left before we cross a catastrophic threshold. If we hit that 1.5 degree mark, the source notes that the Earth's climate system literally reaches its limit of adaptation. We're talking extreme heat waves, disappearing glaciers, rising sea levels, and honestly, the very real threat of a sixth mass extinction. And this quote brilliantly illustrates the sheer panic of the situation. To put this into perspective for you, historically, it took about 10,000 years for the Earth to warm 4 to 5 degrees at the end of the last ice age. But warming over the last 100 years? It's happening 20 to 25 times faster than historical norms. The author compares our current carbon accumulation to a car cruising along at 100 kilometers per hour that suddenly, violently rockets up to 2,000 kilometers per hour. The Earth simply cannot adapt to that kind of velocity. There's just no way. To try and handle this runaway car, the source outlines a super strict timeline. To even have a 66% chance of staying under that 1.5 degree limit, we've got to cap our global carbon emissions at 420 gigatons by 2028. And by 2030, which, let's face it, is right around the corner, we have to slash global emissions by 45% compared to 2010 levels. If we fail, the IPCC predicts a devastating 14% drop in global crop yields by 2050. That is a massive threat to global food security. Okay, moving on to Section 2. Gaia, Earth's broken regulation. Let's see how this scientific reality builds into a pretty profound philosophical concept about the Earth itself. Have you ever heard of the Gaia theory? It was proposed by scientist James Lovelock back in the 70s and later expanded by Lynn Margulis. It basically argues that Earth isn't just some dead rock floating in space. Instead, it functions almost like a living organism with a built-in cybernetic system. Now, cybernetics comes from the Greek word for steering or governing. So the Earth literally governs itself using this incredibly complex feedback loop of biological and chemical interactions to maintain the perfect atmospheric composition and temperature for life to thrive. It's really fascinating. Now, this demands a massive paradigm shift for us. For centuries, humans have kind of just viewed the Earth as a passive resource, right? Like a giant warehouse for us to extract things from. But Lovelock argues we have to see it as an active system. Think about it. Over 30 million species are actively working together right now to regulate surface temperatures, oxygen levels, and ocean salinity. The planet doesn't just sit there and adapt to the environment, it actively creates and maintains it. But well, here is the real tragedy of our current era, which is often called the Anthropocene. Earth operates in a delicate state of what Lovelock calls disequilibrium. It's a highly tuned, unnatural chemical state that's only maintained because life is actively managing it. Sadly, human pollution, specifically our massive use of fossil fuels, has severely damaged this self-regulating capability. We're essentially blinding the pilot of that cybernetic system, which leads us directly into our next crucial topic. Section 3, Economic Shift, Ecological Footprint. To fix this broken system, we've got to completely rethink how we even measure human progress and success at a national level. The source emphasizes shifting away from our traditional metrics. I mean, for decades, we've judged a country's success by its GDP or GNP, basically just looking at how much stuff they produce and sell. But this is a deeply flawed metric because it completely ignores the cost of the damage done to actually make that stuff. Instead, the source advocates for using something called the ecological footprint. This metric accurately accounts for the staggering costs of environmental pollution, the waste generated, and the resources required to absorb that waste, like carbon dioxide. Let's look at how this works in practice with a couple of examples. Take Brazil. Thanks largely to the Amazon, they generate a massive biological surplus. But then look at a highly industrialized nation like South Korea. They are operating at a massive ecological deficit, -5.3 to be exact. They consume far, far more than their local land can ever replenish or absorb. Which brings us to Section 4, the bare face of climate inequality. Because this ecological deficit, it is definitely not shared equally across the globe, or even within societies, highlighting a stark reality of global climate injustice. Data compiled from Oxfam and the Stockholm Environment Institute reveals a deeply unsettling socioeconomic divide that happened between the years 1990 and 2015. It shows that the climate crisis isn't just an environmental issue, It is fundamentally an issue of severe inequality. The benefits of carbon consumption flow right to the top, while the devastating impacts fall disproportionately on the world's most vulnerable. The disparity here is truly staggering. Between 1990 and 2015, the wealthiest 10% of the world's population emitted a massive 52% of global carbon. Over half. Meanwhile, the poorest 50% of humanity, we're talking over 3 billion people, emitted a mere 7%. Yet, it's this bottom 50% who suffer the absolute most from the extreme weather, the droughts, and the food shortages caused by all that warming. This gross inequality introduces a concept from philosopher Christian Botts called the fair share principle. It's super easy to just point fingers at governments and big corporations, right? But Botts argues that high-emitting individuals in wealthy nations have to accept their personal, moral duty to reduce consumption. Governmental action alone just isn't going to cut it. If we don't personally accept the inconvenience of reducing our own ecological footprint, well, the system is simply not going to change. Section 5. Religious ecological responsibility. This deeply moral challenge is exactly why major global institutions and religions are radically rethinking their ethical frameworks to help mobilize billions of people. Impartially analyzing the source material, we see an amazing, unified response popping up across entirely different faiths. In Catholicism, for instance, Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical Laudato Si pushes for a massive shift toward clean energy and even calls for ethical investing, basically divesting church funds from fossil fuels. Then, looking at Buddhism, the tradition draws on 2,600-year-old teachings of cosmic interconnectedness. They emphasize that individual happiness is completely inseparable from the health of the planet. And similarly, Won Buddhism explicitly rejects the idea of human dominance, teaching that humans are made of the exact same elements as the universe. And frankly, we just cannot monopolize the earth. The overarching theological shift presented here across all these traditions is profound, and it aligns perfectly with that Gaia theory we discussed earlier. Humanity has to abandon this arrogant illusion that we somehow own the earth, or that it's merely a backdrop for human economic growth. We need to recognize instead that we're merely temporary guests. The earth is a shared home, and it absolutely has to be moved to the top of our priority list, way above unchecked economic expansion. And so, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider the next time you're reflecting on your daily choices. If you're just a guest in someone else's house, how do you treat it? What kind of footprint are you leaving behind for the next guests? The science is incredibly clear. Our time is short, and the responsibility really falls on every single one of us to change how we live on our shared, fragile home. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. See you next time.